So in terms of this presentation today, what I'm trying to do is to give you a background to Project Data Analytics and why we sort of really need to change this agenda. So just to give you a bit of background in terms of where I've come from. So I'm a chartered engineer. I've worked on some big jobs. So I was project manager on $1 billion job. I've led a PMO of $10 billion, and I've worked in loads of different sectors. So I found from that is that we're not really leveraging all of this exhaust plume that's coming out the back of a project. So I tried to do something about it. So last August, in the meetup, we had Crossrail came along to see us, and they presented this slide. I thought it was a great slide, and it really started to reinforce what we're doing. So in project management, we've got these two sorts of data. We've got the sort of data in red, which is used for building the railway and for operating the railway. And just think about Crossrail. Crossrail is a once-through organisation, so its job is to build Crossrail, and that's what it does. And as soon as Crossrail is built, Crossrail itself then evaporates. You know, people get laid off and go and work somewhere else, and the job itself turns into the Elizabeth line, and it's run by Rail for London. So that project team then just disbands. So that stuff in red is then transferred over to Rail for London, and the stuff in blue is basically an exhaust plume. So it's the stuff that comes out the back of a project and just dissipates. And the problem with that is nothing's been done with it. It's not really been leveraged. And if you go to Crossrail now, and I've put some freedom of information requests in trying to get hold of this, it's really hard to get hold of it. And now a lot of the project teams moved on. If you do get hold of it, there'll be codes in there you don't understand what they mean, etc., because it's now lost its context. So we've just delivered a £17.6 billion project, and all this data becomes almost meaningless. And for me, that's just fundamentally wrong. So what we're trying to do with some of this data as well is to say, what's its context? What can we get from these insights? And there was 45 trend codes for risk drawdown. Now, risk drawdown at the time last year was £3 billion, and the price of Crossrail has now gone up from 14.8 up to 17.6. So there's another 3 billion in there. So there's 6 billion. So if you take the 6 billion off, you've got a spend of about 12. So it's 50% of the base spend is spent on risk and contingency. Now, if you do that on HS2, because it's a similar thing, you're building track, you're building tunnels, you're building stations, and you're putting signals in, etc., etc. If you do that on HS2, you're going to put the price up by another 50%. We're not really leveraging this data at the moment, and there's something like 23,000 compensation events in there worth pretty close to £1 billion. So a compensation event is through the NEC contractors when you're working with somebody and you have a dispute and you're trying to resolve that dispute. There's 23,000 of those, and I'm arguing there's got to be some insights from that data. Must be some insights from that data. You've got the earned value data, you've got all the dashboards, you've got the observation reports. Observation reports is when you find something that needs fixing, it shouldn't happen, etc. There's got to be a load of sort of insights from that data as well. So all of that together has got massive potential. And people say, well, we're only doing one Crossrail. And I say, it's not Crossrail. What we're doing is building railways and tunnels and stations and signals, etc. We do that time and time again. Network Rail's doing it all the time. Right? So why are we not leveraging all this information? So people say to me, we're doing some of this, Martin. If you go to Thames Tideway, they've got their learning legacy. And you go to Olympics, they have the learning legacy. And Crossrail's got a learning legacy. And you go on there, and it's got things like some lessons learned on there, and it's got some reports, etc. And those reports are quite insightful, but it's about good practice on doing business cases, for instance. It'd be good practice on doing risk management. It's not telling you all of those risks that happened, avoid this because you can expect this risk to occur as soon as you get to this point on a project doing certain things. So it's missing all of that exhaust plume of data. So I then start to look into all these lessons learned, and one of the best lessons learned system I've found is in NASA. And they've got tens of thousands of lessons learned in there. and about 3,000 of those are in the public domain. And I started to look through those lessons. I thought, that's quite a good framework. And then I looked into it a bit deeper, and the GAO, which is a bit like the UK's NAO, is the Government Accountability Office, I looked at their lessons learned system in 2001, and they said it doesn't work very well. It's all broken, limited sharing, the culture's not there, etc. So they looked again in 2012, they came back and kicked the tires again in 2012 and said, it's about the same, it's moved on a little bit, but you're still not really leveraging all of this data. You're not leveraging these lessons, you don't know why you're doing it, and the culture's not aligned with all of this sharing. So I then looked a bit deeper, and I looked at what New Zealand was doing and what Australia was doing. So New Zealand is saying every 50 assurance reports will publish a load of lessons learned and things. So that would be, the assurance report is going to be on some governance issues we found, so we'll then publish some lessons learned that says you should do governance better. We already know that, right? That's been published time and time and time again. And the Australians, until about 2012, every year they published this report, which is lessons learned from these assurance reports. And it would say things like, we need to get better at governance, better at benefits management. I went back through these reports and I thought, you're saying the same thing every year, just in different words. And it's what's in all the guidebooks anyway. It's in the body of knowledge. So why are you doing that? What's the point of doing that? It's not really value added. It's just reinforcing what people already know. So for me, all this lessons learned stuff, I then wrote a paper which was published in one of the journals. It took me about a year to write it with a chap called Stephen Duffield. And Stephen's from Australia, and he got a PhD off the back of his work on lessons learned. So he'd spent 7 years researching this. And what we concluded was, it's not working, right? All this lessons learned stuff in project management, and people say you must do all this lessons learned stuff. I think it's the wrong approach. We take all this complexity in a project and we simplify it into these anodyne statements, these really trite statements, and it's a complex thing. A Crossrail, you can't summarise it into a few lessons learned. And worse than that, recently, the Infrastructure Projects Authority, the UK's big department for managing projects, has published this document that says, we've looked at a Department for Transport, and these are the 3 lessons learned you need to know. And I just think we're running massive multi-billion pound projects, and you're publishing things that should be on the front page of the Daily Mail. What's the top 3 things we need to fix? If it was that easy, we'd have fixed them. So let's stop this publishing, top 3 things to fix, top 5 things to fix. We've known it for about 30 years, but it's not getting better. So we need a different approach, right? This just can't continue, really. So in terms of technology, just to explain some of the differences as well with the terminology, because people talk about artificial intelligence, and it's a bit of a loose word, etc. So you've got various sorts of artificial intelligence. You've got artificial intelligence, which is the narrow stuff. It's performing one task, and that's where we are at the moment in the main. There's general artificial intelligence that starts to bring in some reasoning, and that's probably 20 years plus away. And then we've got the super artificial intelligence, which is your Robocops and your Terminators type stuff, and that's a long, long way away. So in terms of the stack of terminology, we've got artificial intelligence right at the top. Underneath that, we've got machine learning. And machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence. And if you see the definition about that, it's learning from experience. And that's exactly what we're trying to do in project management. We're not trying to summarise all this stuff into lessons learned. That just happens to be a legacy process that we've got that somebody thought of 40 years ago, 50 years ago. The world's moved on. So now, if we start to deploy some of these advanced techniques, which are about learning from experience, that's exactly what we're trying to do. And then you get into deep learning, and that's where you start to get these neural networks and lots of hidden layers. So for instance, we've done some work on bid analytics, and with that bid analytics, we've got lots of different features which enables us to work out the probability of somebody winning a construction job based upon everything that's gone before. And that's where we need to be in project management as well. Based upon everything that's gone before, this is what we think the outcome is, and this is what we think is going to happen. So in terms of the hype, why is this taking off now? It's taking off because we're getting more and more data. It's more accessible. You can store it in the cloud a lot easier. You can connect it, etc. And the algorithms as well. We can draw these algorithms down. And you go and talk to some people who's working in this space and say, I've got some secret magic algorithm. And for me, I'm not convinced with that. I think there's so many algorithms now in the public domain, and a lot of these you don't have to pay for, they're free. So you can get them from places like Python, for instance. Now they are packaged in things like Azure and Amazon Web Services, etc. So they are packaged up, so they're easier to deploy, whatever. But a lot of them are in the public domain. We're just putting wrappers around them. So if you think about these algorithms and why they're getting better, if you think about Google Translate a few years ago, it used to take a sentence and translate each of the words one by one and then flip it back, and then you'd have some clunky sort of translation from German into English, and it didn't really make sense, but you got the gist of it. Now what they've done is they've taken a huge volume of lots of conversations and lots of text, and they say, we now understand what the word order is, and we know what looks like a sensible sentence. So they do that through machine learning. And now when you get the translation, it looks like English, not just all disjointed words. So that's why the technology is moving on, because we now start to do some cool stuff through machine learning. So some foundations as well. I'd just like to talk about graph databases. And for me, I think this is the future in our project management domain. So with SQL databases, you get a big list of people's names and addresses and all that sort of stuff, and then you have something over here which will be projects they've worked on, and you connect them through join tables. And for me, that doesn't feel right in a project environment when you've got so many different things connected to so many different things. What we're actually looking at is more of a Facebook type approach, which is some friends, and some people's worked on that, and some risk occurred or whatever. It's a network of different things that all need plugging together. So for me, I'm convinced that a graph database is the way to go. And there's things like Neo4j, and there's Cosmos in Microsoft as well. And you can go in and rent these from the cloud, and then you can start to join up your data. And you join your data not through join tables, but through relationships, which is really intuitive. And once you start to get those relationships, you can query across all that data very, very quickly. If you try and do that in SQL, so say conceptually, we've got every single risk on every single project ever. You've got to query through each of those data sets one by one and find the connections, etc. In SQL, that'll take minutes or hours or days. If you're doing a graph database, it's pretty instant because it works through the relationships. It's the way that it's designed to work. So we can then start to say, tell me what all the risks were on a subsea contract in the North Sea between this date and this date, which involve this contractor, etc. And you can query it almost instantly. And then you can start to get into predictive analytics then as well, and say, what do I need to know about in the next 3 months on this project that's probably going to go pear-shaped? And that's when it gets really exciting. So the next thing I'd like to have a chat about is the foundations for this. So there's some organisations now who's moving to a tool-based approach, and they're saying, what we need is Primavera P6, which is a planning tool. We need another tool for risk management. We need another tool for benefits management, etc. And a tool-based approach, I think, takes you so far, but it's almost like vendor lock-in then. You've got a tool, and you've got all your schedules, and everybody's trained up on Primavera P6, and you don't really want to move away from it, and all your data's locked up in that bit of the cloud, etc. So there's another approach, which is a platform type approach. And Oracle's got an approach where it's saying, put your data into our system on Primavera P6, for instance, and then we'll put some health and safety data in there as well, and we'll do some other data. So it's starting to connect these things together inside of one platform. But the problem is with that is it's only a subset of our problem space. So you then need multiple platforms to join all this together. So you need a HR platform, you need a finance platform, you need a logistics platform, you've got your basic project management platform. You've still got platforms that you then need to integrate. So it's an integration nightmare again, and there might be a bit of vendor lock-in. If instead we say we're data-driven, so we put data right at the heart of this, you can go and buy the best-in-class ingestion system, and that might be something like Primavera P6, it might be whatever. We're agnostic to it because in the data-driven part of it, That's where all your intellectual property resides. So those are the insights you're trying to extract from. So if you move away from this product-driven approach to more of investing in the data ecosystem, that's when you start to get the massive insights. So we can do this through loads of different things. So we can do Power BI, Flow, and Power Apps. So a lot of this is free. It's bundled in with your Microsoft world. And what I'm finding now that people's talking about some applications, and you can solve a lot of it through this suite. And if you want to do the more and more clever stuff, you can move to Azure, you can move to Amazon Web Services, whatever, and start to draw down some of these algorithms. And Python as well. I said to you before, Python's got a load of libraries in it. And you can go and pull things out of the Python libraries. And as of last summer, Power BI had changed from being a sort of glorified Excel charting tool into being a data scientist tool, because it's now got Python plugged into the back of it. So you can do all these clever things by sort of pulling down on these Python libraries, which I think is pretty cool. And I really like this slide as well. It's a bit of a go-to slide from Gartner, which is saying about where do you want to be, what's your aspirations as an organisation, how are you trying to grow your capability. So we start off with descriptive analytics, and that's where most organisations are at the moment. So you're doing your dashboarding, your reporting, that sort of stuff. So that's all about looking back in the rearview mirror and what's happened. And if you think about a project manager, and I've never done this myself, so I've thought, right, that's my risk register. I'll go and look back on my risk register and see what happened. I don't care, because I'm looking forward at my next milestone, because if we don't achieve it, I'll get beaten up. I'm not looking behind me. So we're doing all this backward-looking reporting, where what you're actually trying to do is forward project and think this is what's going to happen next. So we invest a lot of money doing all this descriptive analytics work when it's not where we actually want to be as project managers. We want to be thinking what's going to happen next. So you then get into some of this diagnostic analytics, which is why things went wrong and why did it happen, etc. And that helps your next job, or it might help your next phase. And then we move into predictive analytics, trying to second guess what's going to happen. And once you start to get that, that's where the clever stuff happens. And then you can start to deploy your resource as a project manager then and work out what's the best way of investing effort from your team and your contingency and your risk mitigation, all that sort of stuff. And then you get into prescriptive analytics, and that's saying let's change the future. So it's not predetermined. So what you're doing with the probabilistic assessments, you are saying that this is what's probably going to happen. And projects are not deterministic, they are probabilistic. So you've got to influence those probabilities to get a different result. So that's exactly what we're trying to do. So prescriptive analytics becomes really, really important. And you start to do scenario planning then, so what if scenarios, and that's when you can change your future. So you can work out then, if I invest a load of money over here, I can make it this % better, and if I invest money over here, I can make it this % better. That's a project manager's job, right? That's what we do for a living. So instead of going, oh, this is what I reckon it is because I'm brilliant and I've managed big projects, we're doing it now evidence-based through a massive data set. So what we're trying to do basically is to work out what is the predisposition of work to variance. And that's quite a mouthful. In human terms, we're all predisposed to something, right? And it might be a heart attack, cancer, diabetes, whatever. We're all predisposed to something. And some of that's through your DNA, your family history, it's going through what you eat, etc. And we know that because there's a data set that underpins it. So what we then do is we know at a certain age, you are probably even more predisposed to something like breast cancer, for instance. So we put a screening program in place, is to say, I believe you're going to be predisposed to this stuff, so I'll start to look out for it. And when we're looking out for it, we can sense it. Is that not the case in project management? Is that at a certain phase of a project, you are more predisposed to some things happening than other stages of a project? That's got to be the case. So if that's the case, why do we not put these things into place which enables us to sniff what's going to go wrong? And that might be a Power App, a simple app, asking a questionnaire a few people. It could be just sampling a bit more frequently on one of your data points. We're now starting to understand what the predisposition is to variance. So we then say, can we predict it, and can we test it, and can we treat it? So with diabetes, you can treat it, you can reverse it, etc. if you're going to have a massive incident on your project and you can see it coming, you can get into this prescriptive analytics where you can change your predetermination. So we can start to influence it. So I think there's a huge amount of read across between project management and a lot of these other sectors. And in health, there's a huge amount of money being invested in health. But in project management, there's next to nothing. So there's not a lot of research going on at the moment in this. So I spoke to Alex Budzu at Oxford University and Grant's in the room from UCL as well. We're just not spending a lot of money on this. And because it's not seen to be a priority, and I can't work out why that's the case when we've got a £600 billion pipeline of infrastructure projects in the UK and $100 trillion globally in 10 years. Just doesn't feel right. So it all needs to be evidence-based, and let's stop this big heroic project managers turning up saying, you know, I'm the ninja, I'm going to go and solve all the problems, because you come with all your bias, and we've seen it on Crossrail recently. They said, we are going to deliver this project on time, we are going to deliver it on time, we are going to deliver it on time, and suddenly you get this explosive variance. It's not incrementing out because you're updating your schedule every month, it goes bang, and it's late by 2 years. There's going to be implications of that because some people have suppressed the truth on the basis of, we don't want this getting out yet because if it gets into industry then we'll have implications, whatever. That culture's got to change. You know, you can't have a gung-ho sort of heroic project delivery culture. We've got to change it. We change it through evidence. So, here's some views on a possible future. And this is a little bit scary at times as well. So if you're in project management at the moment, if you're starting at the bottom of the stack, so this is the bottom of a project management pyramid, and some people start off here doing project administration. So you do your briefs, reports and dashboards. And years ago, you know, you'd have people doing your PowerPoint packs, etc. We're not really doing that anymore. We're not doing the PowerPoint packs anymore. We're moving over to Power BI with some narrative associated with it. And even that narrative you can auto-code, and you can ask Power BI through a voice, you can query it through voice, and it starts to give you some answers. So it's a lot more interactive than years ago, so it's a lot better, and it's almost instant. And there's some people who are still working up all those Power BI reports today by going to this and then a data set and this data set and updating certain things. You can do a lot of that automatically now. So you can do it with the right data architecture, but you can also do it through things like UiPath, which replicates what you're doing. So it click this and click that and click something else, pull it all together. So you can execute some of these dashboards and these briefs now through voice. So you can say, update this month's report, and it'll go in and press all the buttons, whatever, pull it together. There is no human effort involved in it anymore, right? So it starts to become fully automated. If we've got the meeting admin, minutes and actions and stuff like that. So years ago, I worked in NATO, and part of my job was to take the minutes of the meetings and summarise that into a list of actions, and then go and chase people, nag them to get their actions done. So I paid £12 a month for a GoToMeeting, and if I have a meeting and I press a button, it does a transcript of that meeting automatically. You know, it's not exactly correct, but it's pretty good. And if I know what I'm doing, then I would say, action 1 on Claire to do XYZ, end action. And then I can put in a Python script which goes through that transcript and pulls the actions out one by one. I can then pull the actions out through Python and then squirt them into Microsoft Flow. And what that then does for me, I can then go and nag people and say, update your action, and Microsoft Flow keeps on nagging you until you've done it. And if you're just ignoring Flow because it's irritating, I've then got a dashboard through Power BI that says, you're ignoring all of these actions. So I know which members of my team are doing what they should be doing, and which members of my team aren't doing what they should be doing. So all that nausea, which I had 25 years ago, you don't need it anymore. It's all done for you. Why do you need people going around in PMOs, for instance, just nagging people, irritating people, when they don't want to be doing that? Because it's not a fun job to go around beating people up saying you've not done your actions. Right, so let's stop doing it and let's focus on stuff we're better at. And there's loads of other stuff that we can do. And maturity reviews, right? So in project management, we come along and we say we'll do a project program and a portfolio management maturity assessment. And a team of people come in for a couple of weeks and they come and kick the tires on the project for £100,000. And they'd say, let's look at your maturity in risk assessments, for instance. So they'd go around and say, can you show me your risk register? You show me your risk register. They said, when's the last time you updated that? I've updated it 3 weeks ago. Tick, you've updated it 3 weeks ago. Can I see if the management actions have been completed on time? Yeah, tick, tick, well done. Can you tell me who's involved in this, whatever? You get a picture for their maturity of risk management. And it's quite subjective. Why are we doing that? Why are we doing that? That seems mad, right? We should be saying, I've got the risk register here. I know when it's been updated. I can see who's updated it because it's all in the data archive. I can then say, when you updated it, you went in, you put a full stop in. Just so you can get a change state on the save file. That's not a material difference. So I can look at the materiality of the differences from one change state to the next and see if you're trying to frig the system or not. I can then say things like, for instance, with your risk management, your management actions are quite bland. They're not really sort of forensic enough. And I can find that out because I've got a training data set of loads and loads and loads of risk management actions, and yours are very similar to the ones that the junior people have. So we'd expect more from you because you've got 10 years worth of experience, you should be a lot more forensic, etc. So I can now start to gauge your proficiency in risk management. I can also say, based upon all the risks that's gone before, these are the risks that I expect to be capturing in a risk register. And I can almost mark you on your forensicness, right? So your complexity of risk management. I can also say, what's the correlation between your risk register and your issues register? And a risk is something with a probability of occurring, and an issue is with you, so its probability is 100%. So, if an issue came straight in, is that because you were asleep with your risk management? And if most of your issues are coming straight in, then what are you doing? What you're being paid to do? Because you're not managing risk through the process, it's just coming straight in and screwing you up as a project. So you're asleep on the job, and you're not really focusing on risk and issue management. Now I could go on and on and on with that, all right? So I can look at loads of different stuff with data science. It's in real time, it's really forensic, and it's a damn sight better than a P3M3 type assessment. So why are we doing all of that? Why don't we do this new stuff? And that is really going to change project management. It's going to flip it upside down. And I've now got an insight on every single member of my team on their ability to schedule properly, ability to do risk management properly, their ability to manage all the stakeholders, whatever. I've got like a fantasy football league, you know, he's my best on this, he's best on this, etc. I've got my team performance. I know who my ninjas are, and if I've got a really, really difficult job, I can reach into my portfolio and make sure I've got the right people at the right time. And if somebody needs some coaching and stuff, I can see it now because I can see where their performances start to fail. I've never had that before, right? That's all possible today, we're just not doing it. And why aren't we doing it? Because nobody cares about this stuff. And that's why I'm here, is trying to change it and say, let's care about it. The next thing is on scheduling. So we have loads of schedules and people say on agile projects we don't need schedules and stuff, but you try building a skyscraper without a schedule and do it agile, it'll finish up pear-shaped. So there's some projects that do need schedules and some projects that don't need schedules. So we work inside my company on an agile basis. We have a backlog and we say, let's do this next and that. So that works for us. It doesn't work if you're building a nuclear power station and you're working with a regulator, it just doesn't work. So there's some waterfall jobs and some agile jobs. So we can take those schedules and we'll extract from them all the relationships between those activities. So you can call those triples. So it's a node and a connection. So that's basically like a graph database. That's how a graph database works. So you can take all those work breakdown structures, elements like the foundations on a building, for instance, and you can say, right, I've now got 300,000 schedules. Let's look at all of those foundation builds and let's see what the logic is and let's see what's going to happen in the future. Where am I likely to experience some variance? Where are things likely to go wrong? Is that because we've got clay foundation, clay conditions, sand conditions, gravel, whatever? So you can start to pull it out and you can start to then say, what is my ordering, my sequencing of activities, and what's the most efficient sequencing? Who's delivered the foundations the quickest by delivering things in parallel instead of in series. So that's called nesting in project management. Now that's what a planner does. That's most of a planner's job, is saying, I'm going to lay the schedule out and I'm going to connect that to that and that to that and that to that. If you've already got that because it's known your data set, what's a planner going to do in the future? You say, well, a planner needs to work out the length of each job. So you need to know that, a cement truck turns up or concrete truck turns up, is going to fill a hole with concrete, so that process would take X number of hours. You know that. It's in your data set. So what's a planner doing in the future? I know. Right? And with Power Apps, if I give a job to somebody and I say, right, I'm going to sort of allocate a task to you, at the moment, our planner comes and nags them every day and says, have you done it yet? Have you done it yet? Yeah, I'm 20% complete, 30% complete, 50% complete, whatever. Why are we doing that? We just need an app which says, I've allocated a job to you, and you say, today I'm 20% complete. Ping. And you do that just before you go home. Ping. You don't need a planner anymore. It's just done through the app, and it takes you 10 seconds to do it. Even better than that, a building like this, there'll be a 3D BIM model. And you have a little sort of robot that goes around at night on wheels with cameras on it, and it's comparing, and you can do this today, and it's comparing the BIM model with reality. And it'll say, you put that light in last night, and you put these speakers in, you put this duct in last night. I can see that's the change state from yesterday to today. I can see the BIM model being completed, and I can look at the stuff that's going to be done tomorrow and see if it was done or not. So I can then compare on the BIM model what's red, so what's not been delivered, and what's green in terms of being over-delivered. So you can do that today. So why are we doing all this antiquated planning when we do this really, really cool stuff? And then we move into weather, right? So if you're doing ground conditions and groundwork, that if it's snowing or frosty, certain things are delayed by a certain amount. Now, you take a view on that, so you'd be a planner, you say, well, we're sticking another 50% on that, another 20% on that. You don't need to do it anymore, it's all in your data set. If you're trying to pour concrete in frosty conditions, it might be a day-for-day delay. If you're laying tarmac and it's really chucking it down, it might take you another 30%, right? You know that, it's in your data set. So what you can then do is extract the correlation between your plan and the historical weather conditions and work out what that correlation looks like. And then what you can do is you can link it with the Met forecast going forward, and you can update your schedule in real time. So it's adaptive scheduling. And we can't do that as human beings, it's too hard. There's too many moving parts. But we can do it with machines. And that gets really cool. So what's the planners going to do and the schedulers going to do in the future? I don't know. I think we'll still need some of them, but not as many. And this is going to turn project controls upside down, really. And it's not just saying, well, computers told me to do that, so I'm going to do it. It needs to come up with some recommendations and flag up your distribution profiles on probabilities and work out what's a certain decision and what needs some judgment call on it. This is not just about a computer told me to do it and I did it. We need to be lifted up out of this so we become really intelligent in using what humans are good at, which is all that judgment stuff, not what humans are bad at, which is just being a process monkey and just knocking stuff out the door. We need to stop all that because we don't need to do it today. There's no reason to do all that repetitive stuff anymore. This is not the future, this is today, it's just we're not catching up with it. And there's companies doing some of this, so Enplan, for instance, has now got 300,000 schedules, it's trying to do it. Alice is doing it as well. There's another company called Basis in 8, so they're doing it. They're just aggregating huge amounts of schedules, basically. So to do the same with risk as well. So most risks is a one-through process. If you're working in PMO, you'd look at systemic risk, and that is saying what risk keeps occurring on every project. I'll manage that centrally because it's better to be managed centrally than at a project level. But that's a bit antiquated. We need to be moving on to these informed risk registers. So for these sort of projects, I'd expect these sort of risks. Now that's not saying I have this risk register at the start of my last project, so what I'll do, I'll cut and paste it to my next project, because some of those risks just didn't do anything. You put them in just to pad the risk register out. You want to look in the aggregate which of those risks have really caught you out, which ones have moved quickly and escalated quickly, and we start to move on then from a conventional risk management into vectors. And what you're interested in If you're a board, a project board, you're not interested in the red risk of Brexit because you've got a team working on that, and that's a distraction for the board because you know they're working on it and you get a plan every week and you see what they're doing, etc. What you're interested in is the vector of a risk. And what I mean by that is a risk which is moving quickly at pace, right? And it's increasing in magnitude quickly. Those are the things that's going to trip you up. So you then start to look at your risk vectors. And we've never really done this before in project management because it's too hard, but it's not hard now. We can sort this out. So we start to then flip risk management around as well. So every discipline we can start to change. We start to do it with benefits management. And in terms of benefits management, we say there's a benefits management plan and a map, whatever. That's a graph. But it's a two-dimensional graph because it's looking at it through a benefits lens. But you see things on there like enabling change and business changes, for instance. Those business changes aren't one-dimensional. There's a business change. Each of those has got a plan at the back. They've got a budget at the back. They've got a resource thing at the back. It's a Facebook graph. So let's not create benefits management documents and schedules, this, that, the other. Let's join them all together in this data environment. And you can query through it as many times as you want to query through it. Benefits management. You'd bring people in who's going to give you a benefits map and they'll say, oh, here you go, this is what I think the benefits are going to be on this job. A lot of those benefits are overclaimed. So when you write the business case, you say, yeah, I'm going to solve certain problems, going to save the company a fortune. In reality, a lot of that is not delivered because people move on. The benefits are realised 3 or 4 years after the job as well. And you don't track them all the way through. And the Infrastructure Projects Authority and National Audit Office have done a lot of work on this, and they've demonstrated that there's a lot of benefits deficit. So things are overclaimed. So if they're overclaimed, how come we're not learning from all of that? We should be saying, when we're putting these sort of jobs in, we don't tend to realise these benefits for these reasons. And we either stop claiming them or we fix that undershoot. But we're not doing it. Why aren't we doing it? Now I love this one as well. This is one of my favourites, this. So this is the way we do it at the moment for stakeholder management. We say, you know, power and influence grids, that sort of stuff. We say that stakeholder's really important. I need to go and speak to him once a week. This stakeholder's less important. I'm going to ignore them, etc. Now, if we move in the future to a graphs, so what that graph is at the bottom is somebody has taken the Game of Thrones script and said, what's the connections between all of these people? Who's in which group of people, which tribe, or whatever the word is. And they've looked at all those connections, and they've drawn a graph off the back of it, and that's just from the script, right? So if you can produce something cool like that from the script, and you're saying, well, they're really influential because they now run a big castle and they're going to kill all these people, whatever, that's a lot more powerful than this 1980s thing we've got up here in the corner. Why are we doing this stuff up here when we can do this today? We need to just change stakeholder management completely. Just needs updating and refreshing and doing some cool stuff with it. So I talked before about these P3M3 maturity assessments, right? So it's all about process adherence, frequency of update, materiality of update, all that sort of stuff. So we can do all that. But Jeff Bezos says he's not interested in people from Oxford and Cambridge and who's really clever. He wants people who are right most of the time. So if I now look at your schedule forecast versus actual, I look at your cost of forecast versus actual, I look at your risk register, I look at your issues, etc. I can see if you're right most of the time. That's really powerful, right? It gives me really forensic insights into your ability to be right most of the time, which is pretty cool. And then something else we're not quite understanding yet as project managers is this concept of black box AI. So something like Enplan, for instance, is going to take these 300,000 schedules, and we don't know where they come from. So 100,000 of them might be from India, for instance, where the health and safety laws are different to ours. The ground conditions are different, the weather conditions are different, etc. So when you're drawing correlations, what is the effectiveness of the deep learning algorithms? Has it been tuned enough? Are the weightings appropriate? Has it been validated for our conditions? And if you just go out and buy these black box algorithms, which you will do in the future, Are you qualified to understand its integrity and its validity for your situation? And then Plan's going to have one, and Alice will have one, and somebody else will have one. How do you choose? We're not qualified to choose at the moment, so we now need to start to get proficient through this sort of stuff, is start to understand if we're qualified on this stuff. And if we're not qualified, what do we do as a profession to get around some of this? Because this is going to be really hard. As we move more and more to black box AI, how do we get inside it? Is that a route we want to be going down? Or do we want to be going down a different route? And I'm arguing a slightly different route. And I'll explain in a few slides' time. Now this is a great slide, I like this. So this is the project controls people defining what project controls is all about. So just have a read of that for a second. So what we do with project controls people is we put them through an apprenticeship, which is learning to be a planner, risk management, cost control, all that sort of stuff, because that's what project controls is about. So they learn how to be a Premier P6 operator, right, or a tool job. That's not what that's saying. That's saying you should be a data scientist, yeah, or a data analyst. So this is saying something completely different. So I'm saying there's a disconnect at the moment between what our profession sees as being a project manager, project controls type person, and reality. The reality is that's not a tool jockey. That's a data scientist stroke analyst. And we don't have them at the moment. There's no such thing. So I'm using somebody else's definition, not mine. So I'd say, is that a project controls person, or is it data analyst stroke scientist? And I think it's a bit of both. No, I don't think it's one or the other. But we need to challenge it and say, the world's moved on. We're not scheduling jockeys anymore. We're now got to be a lot more proficient than that. So that brings me then on to these concepts of data trust, right? So the Open Data Institute have done a lot of work on data trust, working with the Office for Artificial Intelligence. And what they're saying is basically, they've been working in the open domain, so let's get a load of data, put it together, stick it into this trust, and let's open it up for society. But they've also said you can't do that in situations where the data's sensitive. So you then need to put it into little vaults where you can share it in a trusted environment. So that might be a non-disclosure agreement on it. You might want to aggregate and anonymize the data. You might want to pseudonymize the data. You might want to strip off the GDPR components, etc. So there's certain things you want to do with that data. So what we've been doing is working with the Oil and Gas Authority, that's the regulator for the North Sea, and we're also working with Sir Robert McAlpine. And what we're trying to do is to get data trust going in different project management sectors. And what that means is if we can pool data on risk management schedules, costs, incidents, compensation events, all those sort of things, we now start to get this massive connected data set. So if somebody wants to turn up with some AI, they can plug into that data set, subject to some agreements and conditions, whatever, and then we can validate as a community, as a set of trustees, we can validate that black box. So if it goes into a black box, we can say, has this been appropriately validated, whatever. So if you want to use our data, we've got some control over our use of that data. So we're working a lot more collegiately then. We're working as trustees, all working together, rather than it just being left to the market. Because it's our data. Collectively, it's our data, so let's work together to exploit that data. So I'd say to you, we need to start off with a data strategy. So each business needs its data strategy. It needs to look at the overall approach. You know, are you going to be tool focused or are you going to be data driven? You then need to get into your data harvesting. Where's your data coming from? For what use cases, etc. And you really need to link it back to use cases. Otherwise, you're just farming data for the sake of farming data. You then need to connect it together and join it all together, and then you can get a load of insights from it and get some productivity improvements. And then when you've got all that, you can move into predictive insights using Azure and various other stuff. So in terms of preparing for it, we're in this situation where we've got, we're sort of collating data at the moment, and that's reporting, so using PowerPoint and Excel. Then some people are moving into Tableau and and Power BI on dashboards and things. And then we start to move into data cleansing, data graphs, text analytics and insights. And then we get into the really, really clever stuff. And if you look at the amount of effort and the learning curve on that, it starts to go really, really quickly. So I think you've got to ask, do you want to be an operative, sort of tool jockey, or do you want to be an analyst? If you want to be an analyst, I'd say it's a different set of skills to being a tool jockey. And I think at the moment, project managers have got a lot of tool jockeys, not a lot of analysts. So individually, how are you going to take yourself on that journey? And my next slide's got some thoughts on that as well. So I think we need to start with the use case and the user story. And just Google that, Google what user stories are. But basically, as a project manager, I would like to understand what the risks are going to be in the next 3 months on my job so that I can invest my risk contingency effectively. That's a user story. When you've got a user story mapped out, you can get a data model that answers that user story, and then you can do a gap analysis between your current data and the data you need so you can answer that question. Right? So don't just start off with a load of data and say, it's like a Rorschach in-block test. What can I see in that data? Well, I can see a butterfly and a chicken. That's not what we're talking about. We need to start with the user story because that is the intrinsic value that you're going to get out from that data set. You need to do it incrementally as well. You need to be knocking this off bit by bit, not trying to do a big bang because a big bang won't work. You look at a team velocity as well, so that's an agile term. And what it means is basically, if you've got a team of people trying to solve this problem, let that team of people work at maximum capacity all the time, maximum velocity. So they're knocking stuff out the door. As soon as they get stuck on something, like for instance, there's a gap in the data, throw that back to the client and say there's a gap in the data and move on to the next thing in the backlog. So you say, just stop on that bit of work, I'll give you the next piece of work to do. And that means that team is working at maximum velocity all the time. And what we do at the moment, and I've seen it a bit next door, is people say, I can't do it. I'm just going to sit here until somebody sorts my data out. That means your velocity goes to zero. Your team velocity goes to zero until somebody else sorts it out. And that's why some of these things, people say, I'll go and do this corporately. And I think you'll have a load of people, who can do some of this, can't do some of it, whatever. Your team velocity is going to be really patchy depending upon the capabilities in your team. So I'd say these events are very useful for defining your backlog. So these are the things I want to fix, and I can do a quick mock-up and say, if I can produce something like that, it'd be cool. All the data engineering and the data science that goes at the back of it, you want to do that through a more agile type approach, sprinting through it, not through this type of environment if you've not got the right people in the room. And you've got to build momentum as well. You've got to show people the art of the possible, and so Robert McAlpine's been doing some of that, inspiring people inside of their company and really getting them going. And now they're starting to change the culture as a consequence. People are thinking about data, etc. It starts from that, small steps first of all, and get going with it. And a discussion I had with a few people yesterday. So I had a boss years ago, and I says, boss, I'd like to do this stuff because it looks cool over there. He said, why would I want you to do that, Martin? Because you'd be crap at that. You're good at being a project manager and doing this stuff. Why would I spend money training you up so you're crap on something rather than letting you do what you're good at? He said, so let's get somebody else to do that because somebody else is good at that. Now, as project managers, PMO people, all that sort of stuff, you're gas fitters and you're good at being gas fitters. What you're now starting to do is you start to train yourself to be electricians on Google. But your gas fitting, you've been through all these courses and you're qualified and you're Corgi safe, all that sort of stuff. And now you fancy having a go at the electrics on the boiler as well, having trained yourself on Google. I say, ooh, hang on a minute, is that the best thing to be doing? I think there's a middle ground here, but I think we need a conversation on it, which is, are we trying to get project managers, PMO people, re-skilled as data analysts? Because I can go and buy somebody who's 22, who's just come off a degree or a master's, who's ninja at it, so they're fully qualified electrician. Or do I want to get my person who's really good at this thing and try and get them to something that they're going to be bad at? Now, I think there's a middle ground in there somewhere. I think there's some of this that you can self-serve on, but it needs a conversation about how do we get those two types of people to work together effectively so we get the benefit of the collective And for some small organisations that can be impossible because you've got one person who's doing it. But for the bigger organisations, it needs some thought. You really need to think about that. And if you are trying to reskill, or you're trying to get into this, is you need to work out which of those roles you're going to play in. So is it a data scientist, do all the machine learning, all the clever stuff, a data analyst, managing data, getting through lots of data and cleaning it up? I think that's where most of the problem is in project management at the moment. It's not in data science. You know, squeezing an extra 2% out of an algorithm is not what we're trying to do today. We're trying to find the data. Right? So we're trying to do the really simple stuff. And the data engineering is all the stuff at the back end, the databases and stuff. So where are you aiming at? What do you want to do as an individual? And if you do want to go and find out some stuff about this and get skilled up in it, you've really got to invest in yourself. It's not something you can pick up, you know, an hour in a week and say, oh, I'll have a go at that. It's a bit like you've done here. You invest in a weekend for yourself and really follow it up. So you start off with these MOOCs, these massive online open courses. Some of them free, some of them aren't. You've got to pay 50 quid, 100 quid or something. If you keep an eye out, there's offers on from time to time, and there was a Python one on through Udemy recently, which dropped down to free. So just pick and mix your courses that you want to do. UiPath do them, Neo4j do them, and Microsoft's got its AI Academy type thing as well. Communities, so go along to meetups to find out what latest thinking is, and that then influences where you want to go. Look at these competitions. So there's something called Kaggle, and what they do on Kaggle, they say, right, here's a load of data. I'll give a prize for the person who gets me the best performing set of algorithms. So that means you've got loads of data, and it's pretty good data in the main as well. Some of it is deterministic. So if you want to have a go at this, you can code and you can go and steal people's code and fork their code, etc. But it's a really, really rich environment for getting into data science because there's loads of data there, and you can have a go at the code and see what somebody else has done. You get into events like this, and you start to share code through GitHub and things. So I think if you do want to get into it, you've got to be invested, and that's not put a load of cash in. That is mentally you've got to go on a journey that's actually quite hard. But once you pick these capabilities up, you'll start to become effective fairly quickly. And I would say, if you do want to go on that route, just think where the jobs are going to be in a few years' time. And if your company is advertising for a new role and you apply for it, are they going to go and employ you into that role, or are they going to employ some 23-year-old who's just come off a data science course? So you might be knife and forking through it now, but are you competitive enough for the future? And I think that's a question you all need to ask yourself. So at the moment, there's a lack of shared vision about what this stuff can do. And this is why I go on the conference circuit. I'm going to be at Big Data London with Gareth doing digital construction world and stuff. So I'm trying to get the word out there, and through this as well, we can show people the art of the possible. And that's why I'm really keen today that your presentations push the boundaries, because we can then take that back to everybody and say, oh, look what we've done. That's just over a weekend. Imagine what we could do if we spend a few months on this, all working together. It's lack of skilled horsepower as well, and what we're doing through this is to cross-train people, you know, learning from each other over this weekend. You're seeing what the art of the possible is. You then find out, well, I'm going to do a Coursera course in this now because I've seen what these things can do. I don't want to do more on it. A lack of data, we'll fix that through a data trust type approach, and it's understanding the investment case. And we're starting to do that now. So at the last meetup, we was working with Osborne and working with Keir as well, and we looked at the deployment of robotic process automation. And we now know if we do just over a week's work, we can save a company 80 grand in terms of the repetitive activities. So the investment case now starts to build out. If we start to share those things and share those instances, we can really start to change the business case for a lot of things I've been talking about. So that's me. Come and find me on LinkedIn. And don't forget to sign up to the Project Data Analytics community if you're not already signed up. And there you find out about next meetups, hacks, all that sort of stuff. So that's me. That's the case for Project Data Analytics. That's the best way of getting started in it. So any questions? All stunned silence. Well, thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it.